On the line with me, I have Coleman Samuels, who is I actually was thinking about the co-founder of Shelva, but a founder at Shelva, which is an amazing organization in Israel for children with special needs. And so our conversation today, while Shelva is an incredible story, is going to be a little bit different than a standard format that Coleman is used to, because Coleman and I are actually friends. My wife Tanya and I have been involved and supporters of Shelva for over a decade, and we love everything they do, and we've watched it grow from a small medium-sized institution to a massive institution. And we're going to have a nice conversation today with Coleman about his journey of starting Shelva and building it into what it is today. This conversation also coincides with Coleman's recent memoir, which he published, called Dreams Never Dreamed, which is a really enjoyable read. I thought I was just enjoying it because I know Coleman, and hearing about his journeys in the 70s and sort of through all the exciting adventures that he had. But it's a really interesting story about his journey of, through life and how he arrived at starting Shelva. So I'd like to just let Coleman take a minute or two to introduce himself, and then we'll dive into some questions about Coleman's journey, the challenges he faced along the way of building a successful nonprofit, learn more about his experiences. Coleman, it's great to see you. I'm glad that you have had a refuah shlema, and you're looking healthy. And I'd love to hear a little bit, just from you and with everyone on, share a little bit about where you started from and your foundation, and then I'll dive into our exciting questions and answers.
My name is Coleman Samuels, born and raised in Vancouver, Canada, child of the 60s. My name on my passport remains Kerry, Kerry. And after high school, I had a lot going for me: basketball scholarships, academic scholarships. And I was on my way to France after first year university to study. My mother asked me to spend a couple of weeks in Israel en route. And those 2 weeks became a summer. That summer became another year, to my father's chagrin. And then it became a lifetime, because that's now 50 years ago. So as you can see, there's been some changes from a non-religious kid from Vancouver over the years. And our life experiences, together with my dear wife Malki, opened our eyes to situations that we would never have known otherwise, and motivated us to try and do something significant for other families with children with disabilities.
There's magic in this place.
What is so beautiful about Shelva is that they put the family and the child first.
Shelva is home. Shelva is family.
It's new day at Shelva. It's a new day with love and happiness.
To understand the magic that is Shelva, you have to come here to see the center, the scale, the impact, and only then you can really understand what is Shelva.
You raise me up so I can't stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong.
There's warmth, there's love, there's meaning.
The early intervention unit at Shelva is groundbreaking.
Essentially, we're developing something new, something that doesn't exist anywhere in the world.
Physiotherapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, hydrotherapy, massage treatments, sensory treatments.
The Oral Hygiene Wellness Clinic for Preventative Dentistry at Shelva is the only one of its kind in Israel and in the world.
Children's activities in the after-school programs and also in inclusive programs together with children without disabilities allows them to develop an unbelievable sense of self-confidence.
You raise me up so I can
makes them feel that they are not different from any other child.
Raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong.
לבר יש תסמונת דאון. קמנו כל בוקר לחוסר ידיעה. כל יום נפתח בתחושה של ייאוש.
אני לא חושבת שזה משהו פשוט שאתה יודע שלילד שלך אין חברים, ואף אחד לא רוצה לבוא לבן שלך, ואף אחד לא רוצה אותו. והוא פשוט לבד.
ברגע שהגענו לשלווה, הכל השתנה. הגענו למחלקה של אני ואימי, הבנו שהגענו למשפחה.
כשטל חזר שמח, כל הבית הפך להיות שמח. טל כבר 14 שנה בשלווה, 4 שנים בלהקת שלווה, מופיעים בארץ ובעולם. טל כבר שנה עובד בבית קפה.
שלווה בעצם עזרו לפקוח את העיניים ולהבין, יש לי ילדה מהממת, יפה, מדהימה, ויש לה תסמונת דאון.
There is so much to learn from Shalva, from the professionalism and from the treatment methods. I think it's a wonderful thing that Shalva shares its knowledge. What we do does not stay in Shalva. It reaches far beyond.
When a visitor leaves the center after a tour, he becomes an ambassador for children with disabilities, an ambassador of acceptance of those who are different.
At Shalva, we don't only think about the child today. We think about the child tomorrow, how he will be when he grows up.
Beyond the professionalism of the staff, they are first and foremost caring.
Every child with special needs a mother, a father, and Shalva.
At Shalva, every new day, a child and a whole family are saved.
Every new day is a new challenge.
New insights.
Breaking boundaries.
Victory.
Giving.
Another day of progress. Children continue to grow, to flourish, and to develop.
Every time I see that video, I get chills.
As do I.
It's so amazing. So before we, I want to, there's a lot I want to talk about. And I want to also be mindful of time. I'd really like to start off actually by talking about your book and some of the stories in here that resonated with me. Specifically the earlier days in your journey when you ended up in Israel instead of traveling to France. I guess it would be helpful to hear like some context about that planned trip to France and then the subsequent change to the trip to Israel. But what I'd be curious to know about when you first got to Israel and you started encountering religiosity, right? The different experiences. Your first Shabbat. What was when you first encountered? You talk about it in the book, but I'd like to hear from you. So, what were you thinking when you started to go deeper into the rabbit hole of Orthodoxy, and what was going through your mind, during that first Friday night meal that you had, and the context around that?
If you ask my father at that time, a very bright, successful lawyer in Vancouver, may he rest in peace, he said, "Hey, you've been taken over by the Moonies." So everyone came with his sense of perspective, but I didn't grow up, without Judaism in my life. I had a bar mitzvah. I went to Sunday school. We were very Jewish. My grandmother, came from Europe, and she used to bake challahs every Friday. We made Kiddush Friday night, but we weren't observant. After the Friday night meal, everyone went his way, and I went to play basketball on Friday night. But when I came to Israel, I was struck actually by a conversation I had with an interesting man whom I met, and Israel being Israel, you meet a lot of interesting people and they're very open to talking. And he asked me why I'm going to France. And I said, because I'm studying Western civilization, I'm going to be a professor of Western civilization. So he says, why are you going to study somebody else's civilization before you know your own? So I said, what do you mean? I know my own. And so he began asking me some questions, and I realized very quickly that my level of knowledge was pretty, not very deep. And I had a professor in first year university in philosophy who used to mock everybody going to, in those days, to India, to China, and used to say that they don't have a yardstick. If you want to be able to understand a bigger other culture, you must first study your own. And he urged us, in quotes, to study Western civilization. And that's what I set out to do. When this rabbi asked me this question, it hit me very heavily because I realized that he's right. Within the world I live in, my primary civilization is my Jewish heritage. And if I don't know that well, what am I doing being busy going to India, China, or for that matter, trying to understand broader Western civilization? So I said I would take the summer. And the summer turned into a year, and the year, as I say, a lifetime. So my getting close was somewhat intellectual, but there's no doubt that where a person ultimately goes in his religious life is something that I don't think he himself can ever quite explain.
And so you end up on this journey, and you're in Israel, and you come to, I guess I should rephrase it, not your first Shabbat, but your first sort of like experience of Shabbat in, I think it was Mea Shearim, where you came and you joined a family for Shabbat, and you walked in there to this house for the first time, seeing like what an ultra-Orthodox home looks like. So at that moment in time, what was going through your mind, if you recall?
Let me get the heck out of here. I was leaving, buddy. I was waiting. It was actually in Bnei Brak, and it was a very ultra-Orthodox home. It wasn't the kind of homes that people in Houston know. It was the long coats, the furry hats. It was the whole works. And I just met this guy, and he invited me. This was not, by the way, the rabbi who I'm talking about, but it was the first person I spent Shabbat with. And I was actually on my way out. And it was at the end of that Shabbat that I was introduced to this other very well-spoken Australian rabbi, brilliant man. And he was the one who spoke to me. And it was he who said, I realized, let me give this 6 weeks. And that was it. So I didn't commit to more for 6 weeks. And my gut was wrenched. I mean, it was the most difficult decision probably in my life. And not that I knew what I was getting into. I thought I'm going for 6 weeks. But I was getting into something much broader than I could ever have imagined.
How did you meet Malki? And sort of how did that fall into that journey that you started with that 6-week yeshiva stint?
Well, Malki and I were introduced in an age-old Jewish form. We were introduced to each other. I had become religious. She was a religious young girl. Now, Malki is very much international, born in Europe, lived in New York, lived in Jerusalem, speaks 6 languages. So I wasn't dealing with a local girl. And we married, and we 8 months later, and we began to have our own family. And our second child, Yossi, was injured by a faulty vaccination. And I'm not talking about a single faulty vaccination. For 6 months, the government had largely medical malpractice where they were giving the public 2 batches of vaccine that they knew themselves, in retrospect, they knew themselves they were having severe problems. Rather than just cutting it, they continued to give it, and hundreds of kids were injured. Yossi was one of them. And he became blind, deaf, and very hyperactive. And Malki, in my life, I was studying at that time in a very serious way to become an ordained rabbi, and I did in 7 years after the fact. But our lives got flipped on their heads. And Yossi demanded every minute of our day, and we couldn't get proper medical advice. People weren't talking. My uncle happened to be the head of orthopedics at Maimonides Hospital in Brooklyn. And we went out for 3 weeks to New York, and we learned very quickly that Yossi will never see again. His hearing is damaged. And we struggled. And Malki was a dynamo. It remains a dynamo, always under the radar, as Yosef mentioned. And one day Malki had a visitor from Israel, a very, very Orthodox woman who was once a teacher of hers. And she said to her, you know, it's very nice of you that you want to keep this child at home, but it's not fair to your husband or to your other children because you're living in a life of plastic. It's a very challenging life, day and night, and you should consider taking this child out of the home. So that night, Malki cried and said, God, I'm never taking Yossi out of the house, but if you ever decide to help our Yossi, I'm going to dedicate my life to helping other mothers coping with their children that I know are crying along with me. And as you know, Yosef, at the age of 8, back in Israel, a lady in the deaf school, a deaf woman, put one of Yossi's palms on a table. The other palm, she spelled 5 symbols in Hebrew. This is a shin, a vav, a lamed, a chet, a nun, the word shulchan, table. And after several days, Yossi suddenly lit up, and she had the smarts to know this was his Helen Keller moment. This was the moment that he got communication. He learned very quickly how to sign. An amazing speech therapist taught him how to speak Hebrew synthetically over 2 years, so now he could communicate with speech. And immediately upon the breakthrough, Malki sat me down and said, it's payback time. I know exactly what I want to do. And she did. She had Shalva all figured out from the first after-school program and other programs, and she had understanding how to fill those gaps. It took me several years to find anyone who would take an interest in helping us. And a friend of my dad's from Vancouver actually did that. And we set it up with 5 kids, 1990, 1 garden apartment. And trust me, I was in the computer field by this time. We thought this was great shakes. No one could have anticipated that in the next 30 years, we would become the biggest center in the world and the most advanced, serving 1,000 youngsters of all ages and of all ethnicities, from birth right through adulthood, in something that we could absolutely never have dreamed of.
What was life like, without this support and, sort of that focus of just, Malki, Yossi, and how did that impact the rest of the family?
Let's put it this way. It was hell on earth. It was absolutely no beginning, no end. Yossi was hyperactive in the most, extraordinary way. Didn't hear, didn't see. We did not have help at home. And we began having our family. We took a decision that we're not going to put off having a family because we don't know what'll be down the road. So we had a young family. And it was a tremendous struggle. To make things worse, we did not know a clear definition of what he had and what the prognosis was, because along with the problems they had in the vaccine, they also shut down all sources of information, which in those days, in 1977, it could be done because there was no internet. And Yossi was simply completely overwhelming.
And that challenge of having Yossi at home, I know to this day, Shalva's focus, a big part of it is respite to the family. So, I assume that your experiences with your family was a driving force in that. But
totally.
And so you said, when Malki had her vision for what Shalva would be, what was that vision?
The vision was, first and foremost, therapy is great, but if you don't take care of the family, if you don't give support and quality of life to the mother, the father, and the other siblings, at the end of the day, the therapy is not going to have the kind of value you want, and the family is going to collapse as they do regularly. And so we spoke from day one about family. The first program was an after-school program where instead of the kids coming home from the government-paid special ed schools at 1 or 2 or 3, they came directly to our Shalva Center. Shalva, of course, means peace of mind, which is what we try to give them. And Malki and her staff ran it. And what it did immediately is that every child who came to our center, mommy and daddy could now work. They could have a 9-to-5 job. siblings could come home and do homework with mommy and daddy, and you had a semblance of a normal, typical life. When the child came home after a hot meal at 6:30, the parents were there to be able to receive him with all the love he needs. Malki didn't stop there. She began building programs around the clock. She created an overnight respite center. Let's fast forward 30 years to the current center. You have 1,000 kids a day. You have the after-school program. From that program, a very large segment every day sleep over, every weekday, every night, different children. But what that means, if today is Tuesday, the parent sent the child in the morning to a government-paid school for special education, came to our center, sleeps overnight with his buddies as a camp-like experience, and we can train him in endless independent skills. The next morning, the school bus picks him up and takes him to a school, brings him back in the afternoon. We bus him home on Thursday night, on Wednesday night. What that means is that every family has 2 days off and 1 night off every week. That mental break is a gift that brings stability. And then Malki sat me down one day 20 years ago and started crying that she couldn't live with herself. She needs a program to help young mothers who just gave birth to babies with a disability and the mothers are broken. And she called it Me and My Mummy. And we have every weekday 21 mothers who have given birth to a child with a disability. The child is between birth and 1.5 years. And they get all the therapies you can imagine. They swim in our beautiful pools. As that mother, the blonde mother, said in the film, something that always strikes me. She says, I realized that my daughter is gorgeous. She's magnificent. And yes, she has Down syndrome. That realization is a huge realization where a young mother can suddenly differentiate between, oh my God, my child has Down syndrome, to no, my child's gorgeous, a little bit different, but she's still my gorgeous child. So out of that group, daycare, preschool, we then went to adults and we have vocational training and we have apartments in the community, 6 men or 6 young women in an apartment. So we're servicing the whole cycle of life, and we've always served first come, first serve. We never paid attention to who that individual was. If they were in line, they were the next to be cared for, we took them. And as a result, I'm very proud that Shalva is a model in Israel where we have every kind of Israeli, whether that be Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and interestingly enough, they all get together and they all get along very well.
Malki had her vision, and you did the right thing, and you did what your wife told you to do. But along the way, I just know there must have been challenges that came up for the organization. And so I'm curious, when you think about sort of the most, not the biggest challenge that you overcame, but the most interesting challenge that you faced along the way of building Shalva to what it is today. And so what that challenge was, and also, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky, but also sort of how your journey to that point helped you navigate the challenge successfully.
Well, there were enormous number of such moments, but if I can choose one that was very significant, in 2005, as you mentioned, Malki had built a center of our own, finished in 1998, and we serviced, hundreds of kids. And the government came to us and said, look, there's hundreds of kids waiting to get into your programs. You haven't got the physical space. If we give you a very large piece of land, would you build a much larger center? And actually I scoffed, because when I did need land for the first center, they laughed me out of City Hall, and I was working full time in a senior position in the computer field. I didn't have time to run around with politicians. And so we actually just built it ourselves. So I really didn't have much faith in what they were saying, but they took me and they showed me the land they were talking about in the heart of Jerusalem, 500 yards from Mount Herzl. And it was a difficult topography, but incredibly, it was 7 acres in the heart of the city. And I brought Malki separately, took her to see the land, and we both said to each other, it's not a crime to fail, but it would be criminal not to try and take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity where the government is going to give us a piece of land that's unthinkable. Now, it was unthinkable for us because we didn't have a penny to our name. We didn't have what to build with. I knew at this point how to keep the current Shalva together, which was, several $1 million a year, but I had figured that out, and it was a lot of work, but we were doing it successfully. But to go into something of this scope, Yosef, was something that was unthinkable. Yet, we made a decision, we're going to give it a shot. And it took us 10 years because one of the powerful neighbors was an old hotel, and they fought us and the government tooth and nail. They did not want people with disabilities near them. So instead of taking whatever it might have taken, it took us a full 10 years. We were in 15 different courts over that period. So that would have been, I think, the ultimate decision. And people did say we're crazy. And I think maybe we were. But we went on the basis of a very deep faith that somehow if this is really happening and somebody's offering this kind of land, we're going to go for it. And I must say that the road to getting this 220,000 square foot center finished was extremely difficult, fraught with difficulties on every possible level, and certainly in terms of raising $70 million to build it. Malki designed it with the best architects. They had no clue what she wanted. The interiors, nothing there moves that Malki didn't pick out, again, with professionals to help her. But she couldn't find the tiles she wanted in Israel. She flew to Italy, northern Italy, twice till she found the tile. As a matter of fact, she couldn't find the tile. The owner of an enormous football-sized factory liked her and said, tell the lady I'll make her whatever she wants. So she didn't give up. She never let things, there was no such thing as doing the wrong thing because it was difficult. So thank God we're in the center since 2016. And I thank God that we managed to make it, because en route, I had great fears that I had raised millions of dollars, built foundations, and wasn't sure with all the legal things if we would ever be able to get it finished.
How did those experiences help you navigate through?
But I was an athlete, and I always say that being an athlete is a great way to start life, because you have that intestinal fortitude, you have that determination that you're not going to stop until you can do what you have to do in that sport. And similarly, you're not going to stop until you get the job done, whether it be in Shalva or wherever else it is. It's a quality, I think, that comes naturally in some ways, but it's really developed with sports. But we had great lessons before this lesson. The government never gave us a penny for the first 14 years of our existence because we did it our way. We refused to do exactly the way they wanted to do things, which is why we created Shalva to begin with. And with doing things, I once said to Malki at that time, how long can I go on this way? She says, just go on. Ultimately, they're going to come around. And they did. But the concept of family first was totally strange, and we were mocked in the early days by the government. When I say the government, the Ministry of Social Welfare, the particular ministry that just focus on therapy and forget about this nonsense about the family. And some 15 years later, in 2004, 2005, at that time, my young director of education came running into my little office and said she was crying that they've stolen our text off our website about family first. And they've now put it almost word for word on the Ministry of Social Welfare website as their policy. And I was laughing. And she says, why are you laughing? This is terrible. I said, terrible? For 14 years, they've been mocking us. And all of a sudden, this is the view of special ed that they now incorporate into their thinking. We have changed the world. So, we were always, I don't say we were street fighters, but we never had it easy, and keeping Shalva together was always a battle. So this was simply a battle on a totally different scale, but it was not something that we hadn't, had to cope with in the past.
And the amazing thing about Malki is that family first notion comes through in every single brick at Shalva, and the colors and the music, and it's just amazing. And in the video, I mean, Tal is I think one of the musicians in the Shalva band, and he's a celebrity chef at this point in Israel as well, from his work at the Shalva Cafe in the center. But in Malki's vision, how much of a part did the other the music and I remember like the those sensory rooms, like how did that fit into her vision, and how important was that in building out everything at Shalva, that both the colors and the sounds and everything in there resonated with happiness?
Malki, this was critical to her. Cleanliness was critical. She says, if I can't keep this place absolutely, not just clean, but immaculate, then I'm closing it down. I'm not here to be just another organization. And the first thing people see when they came into the old Shalva, to the apartment, when they come into the new center, is like, oh my God, this place is totally immaculate. You can eat off the floors. And that's in spite of the fact that hundreds and hundreds of kids are running around and they're not cleaning up after themselves. Malki just had a vision, and color was part of it. The first building was full of color. This current building is full of murals and art. And it was never for herself. When she built the building, for example, on the upper 3 floors where you have the preschools, the corridors are very, very wide. When I say wide, they're probably 5 meters wide. And the architect said to her, Malki, you've no idea how much space you are wasting in the length of the building, because these corridors are so wide. We have to make them normal corridors. And so she said to the architect, Randy, for you, these are corridors. For me, these are living spaces. Every child and every family that comes into this building needs that space where he's not walking down a hotel corridor, but he's in a colorful, beautiful area where he feels at home. And she has succeeded in an amazing, amazing way.
I mean, and it shows, just from the joy on the kids' faces. So then, recently the Shalva got quite a bit of publicity from the Shalva band, which is just amazing. And I was wondering if you could just I want to share a video of the Shalva band. But I was wondering if you could give a little bit of context to the band, how it started, and seeing someone like Tal, but why is it so important beyond obviously the good publicity that they got, but why is it important for the kids at Shalva?
Music was always part of Shalva. From the first apartment in the first days, we always had someone there playing music, working with the children. As few children as we had, music was a very, very central part. It brought joy. It brought them a lot of skills. And as the buildings grew and as Shalva grew, we go back to 2005, a young man stepped into my office. He looked a bit frail, a bit different. And he says to me, my name is Shai. And he sits down and he tells me he wants to work as a music therapist. I said, thank you very much, but I already have one. He says, no, but I'll build you a band. So I said, tell me more. And in the course of conversation, it turned out that he was in a special unit and he'd been injured in the worst possible way. He's now after his injury and he wanted to go back to his first love of music. I said, Shai, listen, start the band and we'll see where this goes. And I didn't have money, but I just wanted to help this guy. And I sincerely believed in the idea of building a band. And this guy went around and he picked out children with Down syndrome, with other problems. And he tested all the kids in the different programs, and he found a number of children with musical ability, and he began to develop that. And they were playing percussion and other things, and they began to appear in little in-house appearances. And then they became good enough that they were invited to play at out-of-house performances within the world of disabilities. And then they became very professional, and they went on a world tour in 2018. And Google, actually in New York, hosted them. There's something called Ambassadors of Change. It's on Google. It's really quite amazing. It's an hour performance, and the local Israeli television show, like America Has Talent, is called Rising Star. They got wind of this, and they invited the band to audition for their program. The band auditioned. They were immediately accepted, and they began to compete. Now, when I say to compete, they were competing against Israel's best professionals, because the winner of this competition represents Israel at what's called the Eurovision. This is 42 European countries, 200 million viewers. And because the year before, a woman named Netta, an Israeli, had won this competition, the Eurovision, it was now held in, the Eurovision was being held in Israel. The band wiped out the competition, literally. They got to the finals, and while we were in the finals, Final Four, and heavy favorites, the Eurovision gave word to the local producers, the network, that all musicians, all shows would have to perform a complete dress rehearsal on Friday night, not just on Saturday night. This threw a wrench in our plans, because 4 of the band members of the 8 were religious. They got together. It was a very difficult decision, but they decided we came in as a family, we're leaving as a family, and we're not going to give up our values for this. It became literally headline news, television. And if you look up Shalva Band, Eurovision, it's unbelievable. Sabbath, it's crazy how much PR was around this. But then Eurovision turned around and asked them, we withdrew, and Eurovision turned around and asked them to perform as guest performers at the show. And they did that, and they sang a song called A Million Dreams from The Greatest Showman, the film, and they literally conquered Europe. The BBC, that doesn't have too much nice to say about Israel, tweeted minutes later that this is the most amazing thing. These are the real winners of the competition. There was 500,000 tweets on that tweet within about 2 hours, and all over Europe, people were talking about this. So the band has become very famous. They've been invited to play at every big event in Israel, whether that be Independence Day. There's nothing they haven't done. They were voted one of the 10 most influential persona of the last decade by the media at the end of 2020. And now, of course, it's very challenging with COVID. They're still doing a lot of performances with Zoom, but for us, it's one more program. In other words, in every program we do, our interest is to maximize potential for every child. These youngsters have musical talent. We're making them and maximizing their talent. But it's really an extraordinary story. And again, something that we could, as the book is Dreams Never Dreamed, I could never have dreamed as a secular kid talking to you today as a rabbi. That was not in my plans. When Yossi was injured, I could never have dreamed that he would one day be able to communicate. And when we did set up Shalva, and when he did have the breakthrough, we could never have, we could never have dreamed of Shalva coming out of it. If I may, Joe, just in 1 minute, I want to just tell you where Yossi is today. Yossi's 43. He can't hear, he can't see, he hasn't been able to walk for 20 years. That has not stopped him from meeting and being hosted by President George Bush, by being hosted by the Prime Minister of England. It hasn't stopped him from becoming a sommelier and putting out 2 very well-known wines in Israel, putting out a 3rd next week. It hasn't stopped him from riding horses, and he always dreamed of riding elephants. And one day, 2 buddies took him to Thailand to ride elephants, and a couple of days later, I was hosting 3 American congressmen, and I told my secretary, don't bother me, let me speak to them, and then I'll take them on a brief tour. And 3 minutes later, she's back knocking at the door. I looked at her, and she says, very emotionally in Hebrew, for God's sakes, look at your email. I looked at the email, and there was Yossi, my Yossi, on top of an elephant in Thailand with his 2 buddies, smiling from ear to ear. And I broke down, and I said to the congressman, gentlemen, we all grow up, we all have dreams, and at some point I think we sort of whether we give up or we don't give up, we stop dreaming new dreams. Yossi's the one guy with no reason, really, no, why in the world would he be dreaming? And yet, can't hear, can't see, can't walk, never stops dreaming, and never stops realizing his dreams. And if there's a message for me today to you, my friends, it's please dream on, don't let anyone get in your way, and may God help all of us realize our dreams.
I love it. Kalman, it's great to see you. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know it's late in Israel. And yeah, I just want to, remind everyone, Dreams Never Dreamed. It's an amazing book about personal journey and perseverance, and that reminder never to give up. And I feel extremely grateful to know you and Malki, and I really appreciate you sharing that with our community here in Houston. Hopefully COVID will be over soon enough and we'll be able to travel again, and we'll be able to see each other in person again, and maybe in Houston, maybe hopefully in Shalva in Israel. I always love visiting there. So thank you so much for taking the time. And
thank you. Thank you. And thank you, my friends, for joining us. And I look forward to hosting each of you at Shalva. And I do want to mention, in better days, we have the finest Italian cafe in the city. 85,000 visitors in 2019. Would love to have you there for lunch, and lunch is on me.
Thank you so much, Kalman, and I'm going to take you up on that.
I knew you would.